Part 43. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 422. Except for the fact that the bedboard is a little hard and my back hurts after I wake up, everything else in the study is fine. After two people sleep for a long time, being alone occasionally can also improve one's happiness. Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi slept last night, and Tang Ning slept alone in the study. She could only use this reason to comfort herself. The bumpy road for nearly half a year has changed his routine. Although he didn't sleep for long yesterday and got up early in the morning, he became energetic again after washing up. He revised the note he wrote yesterday and transcribed it again, and then planned to go into the palace and hand it over. This letter was an oral edict issued by Emperor Chen himself. There was no need to go through the conventional process. He only had to submit it to the Hanlin Academy, which would then submit it to the emperor. He ate something to cushion his bed and left the house. Lao Zheng wanted to stay in the Tang family and there was no need for him to kill pigs and sheep, so he took the initiative to take on the responsibility of a groom. After Tang Ning walked out of the small courtyard, the door of a certain room slowly opened. Xiao Ru walked out of it and turned around and said, "My husband hasn't had breakfast yet." Although Zhongyi could not bear it, he still held her hand and said, "At this time, you cannot be soft-hearted. You don't want to have more and more sisters in your family, right?" Su Ru whispered, "As long as brother Xiao Ning likes it, I have no objection." You are just too spoiled to my husband." Zhongyi patted her on the butt and said, "There are many foxy girls in the capital who like my husband. If you still spoil him, you won't be able to live in the house in the future." "Don't worry, sister, brother Xiao Ning won't do this." Su Ru shook her head and said, "He has always been measured." Zhongyi looked at her, sighed softly, and said, "Anyway, this time, you have to listen to me. You are not allowed to go to him secretly at night. You can't let him think that we forgive him so easily." "Okay then." Su Ru lowered her head and whispered, "I'll listen to my sister." When Tang Ning entered the palace, the morning court had already begun, but he didn't have to go to court. He could just send the papers to the Hanlin Academy and then go home. Not long after he walked out of the Hanlin Academy, his steps suddenly stopped. He reached out to grab the hand on his shoulder, threw it over his shoulder, and threw the person who tried to sneak attack from behind him to the ground. Xiaoju got up from the ground, patted the dirt on his body, and exclaimed, "I haven't seen you for half a year, you are so good at your skills." Tang Ning looked at him and said, "You're not bad either." After training in the palace for so long, Xiaoju looked different from the one he first met. He had a more capable and fierce aura, worthy of being born in a general. In half a year, the original cynical temperament of the second-generation ancestor disappeared. "That's almost it?" Xiaoju looked at him, his expression suddenly became mysterious, and said, "I'll tell you a secret." Tang Ning asked, "Have you become a real man?" Xiaoju was surprised and said, "How do you know?" Xiaoju's hidden disease is congenital, and it is not easy to cure it. However, if he has been taking medicine for so long and the kidney strengthening technique produced by the old beggar, if it still doesn't work, he will be hopeless in this life. Tang Ning looked him up and down and asked, "Have you been to a brothel?" "No." Xiaoju shook his head and said, "How can a man's first time be so hasty? I will not give my first time to those promiscuous women. I have to wait until the wedding night." Tang Ning asked in surprise, "Is there a woman from the capital willing to marry you?" Little young Master Xiao went to a brothel has almost become a secret known to everyone in the capital. Ordinary women cannot enter the Xiao family. Who is willing to sacrifice the happiness of the rest of his daughter's life in the same family as the Xiao family? Therefore, Xiaoju became one of the few older men left in the elite circle of the capital. "No." Xiaoju shook his head. Tang Ning looked at him with some pity. There was no essential difference between whether his hidden illness was good or not. This was the greatest sorrow of being a man. I still have to go on patrol. Xiao Ju looked at a group of guards approaching and said, I'll treat you to a drink another day. As a man, Tang Ning sympathized with Xiao Ju's experience and could relate to her. If he could once again set the record of having 10 girls in a brothel, it might wipe away the rumors and shame that had fallen on him. If he needed it, Tang Ning could provide him with a secret medicine that would be enough for him to fight with those 10 girls until dawn. The consequence is that he must rest at home for a whole month to recharge his batteries. He continued to walk outside the palace, and when he reached a certain bridge, he unexpectedly found Zhao Yuan sitting on the steps, staring ahead in a daze. Hearing the sound, Zhao Yuan looked back and said, Mr. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, Is the Wang family's sister ready? No. Zhao Yuan shook his head in frustration and asked, Sir, is there any way to prevent them from being jealous? The Wang family sister is ignoring me, the Zhang family sister is ignoring me, and the Bai family sister is ignoring me. Zhao Yuan showed a deeply shocked expression and said, I obviously gave them gifts, these little girls, their thoughts are really unpredictable. It would be great if they could be more mature. No matter how precocious Zhao Yuan is, he is still just a child. A little girl's thoughts cannot be guessed, and an older girl's thoughts cannot be guessed either. Certain characteristics of a creature like a woman will not change with age. This principle will not change with age. He won't understand until he grows up. Tang Ning did not comfort Zhao Yuan, who was in trouble in life, because there was no one to comfort him. Xiao Ru Xiao asked him to reflect, and even Tang Yao Yao ignored him. He walked to the entrance of the palace and saw many officials, who must have just left the court in the morning. Master Tang, stay. As soon as he walked out of the palace gate, a voice came from behind him. Tang Ning turned around, looked at the person walking towards her, and asked, Is there something wrong with Mr. Lu? The visitor was Lu Ding, Minister of the Ministry of War, and Tang Ning had not had any interactions with him before. Although there were some conflicts with the Lu family before, those conflicts have long since disappeared over time. Lu Ding stepped forward, cupped his hands, and said, Thank you, Master Tang, for taking care of my son along the way. The son of Lu Ding, the Minister of War, is Lu Tang. Tang Ning returned the favor and said with a smile, Master Lu, you are too polite. Commander Lu has done his duty and served well in the protection. It is I who should thank him. Lu Ding waved his hand and said, My boy weighs a few pounds. I know very well that if Mr. Tang hadn't been there, it's not certain whether he would have come back alive. Lu will remember this favor. After Lu Ding said this, Tang Ning didn't know what to say and smiled slightly in response. By the way, there is one more thing. Lu Ding looked at him and said, Master Tang has been on an envoy to the Chu state as a doctor in the Ministry of Rites for more than half a year. According to His Majesty's wishes, you are the next one to go to the Ministry of War for training. I know that you have just returned from Chu state and have been tired from traveling. You might as well rest at home for a few days and come to the Ministry of War to join the army before the winter moon. Unexpectedly, the next place Emperor Chen asked him to go to was the Ministry of War. Tang Ning looked at Lu Ding, smiled, and said, I will cause trouble to Mr. Lu next. No trouble. Lu Ding waved his hand and said, I just want to give you a warning. His Majesty's decree will arrive in a while. Regarding these two matters, I will leave first. The carriage stopped not far away. Tang Ning got on the carriage and said to Lao Zheng, Go home. Lao Zheng did not raise his whip, but turned his head and looked in a certain direction. Not far in front of him, Lu Ding stopped and looked over. The two people's eyes met, and after staring for a moment, they inadvertently moved away. Old Zheng waved his whip, and the carriage slowly drove away. Lord Lu, what's wrong? An official came out of the palace and asked curiously when he saw Lu Ding standing there for a long time. Lu Ding looked away, wiped the sweat from his palms, shook his head and said, It's nothing. Royal Palace. After the morning court, Emperor Chen went straight to the imperial study. A eunuch stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, the Hanlin Academy has just sent a note from Mr. Tang, the doctor of the Ministry of Rites." Emperor Chen picked up the folder, but did not open it in a hurry. He looked down and said, "Xian Luteng and Hirui entered the palace. Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 423. Emperor Chen read the memorial in his hand carefully and said, "We were attacked on the way, and suffered a coup from the Chu state, and we were able to safely escort the princess back to the capital. You all deserve credit." Hirui bowed his hands and said, "Your Majesty, the grassland people intended to harm the princess and destroy the marriage. It was Mr. Tang who had a clever plan and arranged the plan in advance so that we did not suffer losses. When the Chu state coup happened, it was Mr. Tang who sized up the situation and made a plan. The fact that the mission was not affected by the Crown Prince of Chu and that the mission was able to return safely is all thanks to Mr. Tang." Emperor Chen looked at Hirui and said, "I heard that when the prairie people assassinated the princess, He Iking was willing to put himself in danger and serve as a hostage to break the encirclement of the envoy. Is this true? Only a devil is willing to be a hostage. If Tang Ning hadn't planned to get rid of him at that time, how could he have been a hostage of the prairie people?" Thinking of the days when he was a hostage, Hirui felt desolate in his heart. He didn't know what kind of luck he had to be able to stand here intact today. The next moment, he clasped his fists and said, "Your Majesty, as a deputy envoy, for the safety of the princess and the soldiers, my life is really nothing." Emperor Chen nodded and said, "Hirui, the Prime Minister of Honglu Temple, has sacrificed his life and served as a guard. I will reward him with 100 pieces of silk and a jade belt." Hirui was stunned for a moment, then immediately prostrated himself and said loudly, "I thank your Majesty for your kindness." As the Prime Minister of Honglu Temple, he has never received any reward from the Emperor after serving as an official for so many years. Although the value of 100 pieces of silk is not high, this jade belt cannot be bought with money. In the entire Honglu Temple, only the Prime Minister of Honglu Temple I have had this honor before. At this moment, when he thought about that miserable experience again, he actually had a feeling that all the hardships came with joy. Could this be the so-called blessing in disguise? Emperor Chen looked at Lu Teng again and said, "Lu Teng, you are responsible for guarding the mission on this trip. You have done your duty well and have made great contributions. I will reward you by promoting you to the rank of Lieutenant of the Left Command of Yulin." Lu Teng knelt down on one knee and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty." After discussing their merits and giving rewards, when everyone retreated, Chen Huang showed a trace of doubt on his face and murmured, "Hirui and others have always regarded the Tang family as a follower, but they would speak for Tang Ning. I thought I will sue him properly." Wei Jian stood behind him, smiled, and said, "There are many dangers along the way this time. If it weren't for Mr. Tang, I am afraid that the envoy would not even be able to reach Chu state safely and be able to protect themselves in the chaos of Chu state. Mr. Tang deserves the greatest credit for escorting the princess back safely. I guess they also know what to do." Emperor Chen nodded and said, "I believe in his ability. If Chu's situation is overthrown, it would be a meritorious service. If it were anyone else, I'm afraid it would be impossible to survive." At this time, a eunuch stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, Master Tang has arrived." Chen Huang said, "Inform him to come in." Tang Ning walked into the hall, bowed and said, "I see your Majesty." If he had known that he would be summoned just after returning home, he might as well have stayed in the Hanlin Academy for a while to avoid such trouble. Emperor Chen looked at him and said, "I have already read your story. There are many accidents on this trip. It is not easy for you to deal with them. You have worked hard all the way." "I'm scared." Tang Ning clasped her fists and said, "I failed to get married, and my marriage proposal failed. I have failed His Majesty's trust." Emperor Chen waved his hand and said, "The situation in Chu has changed dramatically. I have said it before, and I cannot blame you for this." After he finished speaking, he looked at Tang Ning and asked, "I also heard that you have a good relationship with Princess Changning of Chu State." Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, "Back to your Majesty, I have requested to marry Princess Changning as ordered by your Majesty. For this reason, I asked to see King Xian many times. I was lucky enough to chat with Princess Changning. I thought it would be helpful in my marriage proposal, but unfortunately I failed in the end. Your Majesty's expectations, I am guilty. It's a credit to you that you were able to deal with the prairie people and not let them marry into the Chu state." Emperor Chu looked at him and said, "What's more, you took more care of the princess along the way, escorted her back safely, and what's the crime?" Tang Ning raised her head and said, "I have been ordered by His Majesty to serve as the wedding messenger. It is my duty to take care of the princess." Emperor Chen looked at him and asked, "I heard that you also captured a grassland assassin." Tang Ning nodded and said, "Your Majesty, that woman possesses miraculous skills and has injured many soldiers. I have handed her over to the Ministry of Punishment for execution." Emperor Chen frowned and asked, "Is the poisonous poison technique you mentioned in the book true?" Tang Ning said, "It's absolutely true." Emperor Chen seemed to be very interested in the art of poisonous poison. He asked Tang Ning a few more questions before letting him go back. Entering the palace this time was a small gain. Although Emperor Chen did not promote himself to an official position, he was rewarded with many things. Those questions he just asked seemed to have something in them. In the imperial study room, Emperor Chen stood up and said, "It's ridiculous that some people suspect that he has an affair with Man'er. Why don't they suspect that he has an affair with Princess Changning of Chu State?" Wei Jian said with a smile, "Master Tang is so charming, and the princess is not willing to marry to the Chu kingdom. In order to comfort the princess along the way, Master Tang probably spent a lot of time and often went to the princess's residence." Chen Huang waved his hand and said, "These secret spies are really inferior to each other." He walked a few steps, an expression of interest appeared on his face, and murmured, "The poison technique is quite strange." When Tang Ning returned home, someone was already moving things to the princess mansion next door. Zhao Man should have moved here in the next 2 days. The princess's visit all day long would attract the attention of interested people. On the way back, she discussed with Tang Ning about secretly digging a tunnel between the princess's mansion and the Tang mansion. Tang Ning had already reached an agreement with her on this issue. It's a cover-up, but it feels sneaky, which is quite exciting when you think about it. However, he could not feel the excitement of meeting secretly for the time being. Although Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi looked the same as usual, after dark, they both went back to the room and closed the door. The meaning was very obvious. After dinner, Tang Ning went back to the study by herself, having the opportunity to experience the happiness of being alone again. In Su Ru's room, Zhongyi knocked on the door and walked in. He looked at her and said, "We have agreed that no one is allowed to go to our husband tonight." Su Ru nodded and said, "Don't worry. Then I'll go back to my room first." Zhongyi stood up and said, "Good night." Su Ru walked her to the door of the room and said, "Good night." There was still an important matter in her heart that had not been resolved. Tang Ning didn't have much thought for reading at night and fell asleep soon after returning to the study. After lying on the bed for a while, he suddenly opened his eyes. There was a knock at the study door. Although the sound was small, it was clearly audible. He got out of bed, opened the door and saw Xiru standing in front of the door. "You. SHH. Su Ru made a silent gesture to him and whispered, "I'm here to accompany brother Xiaoning, please don't tell sister." As expected, Xiao Ru was the most well-behaved. Tang Ning closed the door and picked her up. Just as she walked to the bed, there was another knock on the door. Su Ru hurriedly got under the quilt. Tang Ning walked to the door and opened it. Zhongyi walked in quietly, closed the door and whispered, "I came here secretly. Don't tell Xiao are you tomorrow." As she walked towards the bed, she whispered, "I won't bother with my husband this time about the princess and Miss Li. If we hide it from us again next time, and there is a new sister suddenly, my husband will be prepared to sleep in the study for a month." When she looked at the bed, she saw the bulging quilt through the clear moonlight coming in from the window. She lifted the quilt and looked at Su Ryu under the moonlight. The two people who said good night to each other met again in Tang Ning's study, and the atmosphere gradually became awkward. Su Ryu's face was already red. She covered her face and jumped out of bed, saying, I'm going back to the room." Tang Ning picked her up again and said, "Do you two think this is a place where you can come and leave whenever you want? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 424. Although they slept together harmoniously last night, Xiru and Xiaoi were too embarrassed to meet each other after getting up in the morning. They had agreed to let him sleep in the study for a month, but they both broke their promises, and they met in the same bed, which was a bit embarrassing. No matter what, Tang Ning secretly breathed a sigh of relief. This time, the matter could be exposed so easily, which was completely beyond his expectation. Originally, he thought that even if he didn't have to kneel on the washboard after returning, he would inevitably sleep in the study for a month. He was lucky that Xiru and Xiaoi were traditional women in their bones, and they followed the concepts of this era. If it was Tang Yaoyao who threw the ball to find a husband, I'm afraid his legs would have been broken last night. Speaking of Tang Yaoyao, Tang Ning hadn't seen her for a whole day. She seemed to be more angry than Xiru and Xiaoi about this matter, and she was still angry until now. Tang Ning didn't want to offend her at this time, but it was not easy to pretend that he didn't know anything. He quietly jumped over the wall and saw Xiu'er in the yard. Tang Ning walked over and asked, "Xiu'er, is your young lady here?" Xiu'er walked into the room and took a look. After a while, she came out and said, "Young lady said she's not here." Tang Ning said, "Then I'll go in and find her." Xiu'er quickly reached out to stop him and said, "Young lady said she's not here." Tang Ning walked past her and said, "Don't make a fuss. I have something to talk to her about." Xiu'er folded her arms and said, "Young lady also said that if you dare to go in, she will break your legs." It seems that Tang Yejing is still angry. Tang Ning thought about it carefully and decided to stay out of the spotlight for the time being. He wanted to jump over the wall again, but when he saw Mr. Tang coming in from outside the courtyard, he had to walk to the gate and said, "Hello, Uncle Tang." Mr. Tang looked at him and asked, "When did you come here? How come I didn't know?" Say he jumped over the wall to come in. There was always a suspicion of stealing someone else's girl. Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "When I came in, there was no one at the door." Mr. Tang said, "You came at the right time. I just have something to discuss with you." Tang Ning was uncertain. You and Yao Yao." Mr. Tang's tone was a little angry. His daughter was doing business with others, and he, as a father, had to discuss with them. Who was the outsider between him and this Tang? Okay. Tang Ning nodded. In front of Mr. Tang, Tang Yaoyao would not do anything to him, so he could boldly enter her boudoir. This time, when Tang Ning followed Mr. Tang, Xiu'er did not stop him. Tang Yaoyao sat at the table, which was covered with several sheets of white paper with pig heads drawn on them. Next to each pig head was Tang Ning's name. Tang Ning saw the things on her table and several black lines appeared on his forehead. Tang Yaoyao glared at him and said unhappily, "Who asked you to come in?" "What's going on?" Mr. Tang looked at her, then at Tang Ning, and asked, "Did you have a fight?" Tang Ning didn't seem to care about him at all, but seemed to be gloating. She turned her head to look at him and found that he was indeed laughing. Tang Yao Yao ignored Tang Ning, crumpled the paper on the table and asked, "Dad, what do you want to talk to me about?" Tang Keizu waved his hand and said, "You guys quarrel first, I'm not in a hurry." Tang Yao Yao glanced at him and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll go to the store." Seeing that the two people didn't mean to quarrel, Tang Keizu was a little disappointed and said, "It's like this, the wine you brewed in Lingzhou sells very well and has always been in short supply, but the scale you can do is limited and you can't make a lot of money. Otherwise, Dad will pay some money to buy your secret recipe and open some branches in various states. You can still sell yours. What do you think?" Currently, Tang Grenzai has become the most popular bookstore in the capital, and a series of peripheral products are also selling very well. Although the various fine wines produced in their winemaking workshops in Lingzhou are very popular in the market, the output is limited, and the profit of the output is far from comparable to that of the bookstore. Tang Ning had the idea of expanding the scale of production a long time ago, but he hadn't had time to talk to Tang Yejing about it. As one of the few beverages, the popularity of wine in ancient times was far better than that of modern times. This is a big cake. Once the scale is expanded, the profit of output is unimaginable. If the secret recipe is sold to Tang Keizu, with the financial resources of the Tang family, I am afraid that countless workshops can be built. By then, Tang Keizu will eat meat himself, and he and Tang Yao Yao will not even have soup to drink. Tang Ning did not refuse because he believed in his partner. No, after Tang Keizu opened his mouth, Tang Yao Yao refused without thinking and said, "We are planning to expand the scale of winemaking, and we will not sell the secret recipe." Tang Keizu looked at her and smiled, "With your strength, the scale that can be expanded is limited, and it will take a long time. Dad just said, you think about it again, and Dad can give you more money." What Tang Keizu said actually made sense. Although Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao are now rich enough, they have accumulated it for too short a time, and they cannot be compared with old tycoons like Tang Keizu. The resources he can mobilize far exceed theirs, and he is more suitable for this matter. Tang Yao Yao said without hesitation, "Then I won't sell it." Mr. Tang looked at Tang Ning and asked, "What do you mean?" Tang Ning shrugged and said, "Yao Yao is the boss of our family's business." Tang Keizu was stunned and frowned, "What do you mean by your family? Who is your family?" "Yao Yao is our family." Tang Ning explained, "I mean, it's our business." Tang Keizu said, "Business is business, make it clear, don't let people misunderstand." Tang Yao Yao thought about it, looked at Tang Keizu, and suddenly said, "Although our secret recipe will not be sold, if Dad is willing, we can still cooperate. Why don't we provide the secret recipe and you build a workshop? In return, I can give you 10% of the profit." Tang Keizu had two plans in mind. After hearing this, he thought about it and looked at her and said, 40%. Tang Yao Yao said, 20% can't be more. It can't be less than 30%. 20%. Tang Yao Yao and Tang Keizu were deadlocked for a cup of tea, and finally did not live up to Tang Ning's trust, and the result was a 20% deal. This is not the first time that Tang Keizu has interfered in their business. The two families now have a lot of business cooperation. If they combine even brewing, it will be really difficult to separate them in the future. Tang Ji looked at Tang Yao Yao and sighed inwardly. It was not uncommon for a girl to have a crooked elbow, but what was strange was that she had not yet married. Not only her elbow, but her entire body had been crooked to another family. He thought for a moment, then suddenly looked at Tang Ning and said, "Although Yao Yao didn't take over our Tang family's business, she is my daughter anyway. I still want to thank you for helping her get to this point." "You're welcome." Tang Ning raised her hand and said, "We are friends." Tang Yao Yao said dissatisfiedly, "What do you mean he helped me? Has he ever helped me with anything except using the store's things to give to the girl as a favor?" Tang Ji looked at her, then looked at Tang Ning and said, Yao Yao is young and impulsive. I hope you can take care of her more in the future. Tang Ning said politely, it should be. Tang Yao Yao pouted, who wants him to take care of her? Tang Ji smiled and said, you and Yao Yao have known each other for quite some time. It's fate that we can become such good friends. I suddenly have an idea. Tang Ning looked at the rich man Tang and felt that the scene was somewhat familiar. The rich man Tang's expression at this moment was exactly the same as that of the Prince Xian at that time. Fortunately, Tang Ning did not fall into the trap set by Prince Xian at that time. If she had really fallen into his trap and sworn brother and sister with Lan Lan, wouldn't they now be? It was not until this moment that Tang Ning understood Prince Xian's sinister intentions. If someone shows kindness without any reason, he is either a traitor or a thief. If someone recognizes brother and sister without any reason, he must have bad intentions. Before Mr. Tang finished speaking, Tang Ning looked at him and asked, do you want us to become sworn brothers and sisters? Tang Ji was stunned for a moment, then smiled and said, it's rare that you have this idea. Very good, then we'd better do it today. No, Tang Yao Yao pushed Mr. Tang out of the door and said, I have something else to do. Dad, go and do your work. Mr. Tang was pushed out of the door, and Tang Ning turned around and wanted to leave. Tang Yao Yao closed the door and turned back and said, stop. She crossed her arms and looked at Tang Ning and asked, where do you want to go? Tang Ning stood there and said, didn't you tell me not to come in? You won't come in if I don't let you in. When did you listen to me so much? It would have been better if he didn't say it. When he said this, Tang Yao Yao's face showed anger. He crossed his arms and approached him step by step, questioning, I told you not to mess around in Chu. Did you listen? Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 425. You didn't listen. Tang Yao Yao forced Tang Ning to the corner, gritted her teeth and said, not only did you not listen, but you also talked about two people. Zhao Man didn't say anything, and you still made such a big fuss. Tang Ning failed to live up to Tang Yajing's expectations and was speechless. Tang Yao Yao pointed at his chest and said, are you worthy of Xiaoai? Are you worthy of Xiaoru? It has nothing to do with me who you are with, but will Xiaoru forgive you? Will Xiaoai forgive you? Tang Ning opened her mouth and said, they have already forgiven me. Tang Yao Yao was startled, glared at him fiercely, and said, just wait, I'll go ask Xiaoai. Seeing her striding out, Tang Ning slowly walked out of the room. Xiao Ru Xiaoai's calmness was beyond his expectation, and Tang Yajing's irritability and anger were also beyond his expectation. He walked to the yard, looked at Chiu'er, and asked, is it your lady's fault these days? That day. Chiu'er was startled, counted on her fingers, then nodded, thought for a while, and shook her head. You can't offend the ordinary Tang fairy, and you can't offend the Tang fairy whose menstrual period is messed up. Tang Ning plans to go quickly. In front of Xiao Yi, she won't behave like just now. Master Tang. He jumped up on the wall, and a voice suddenly came from behind him. He looked at Chiu'er and asked, what's the matter? Chiu'er stood in the yard, raised her head and said, I want to ask you a question. Tang Ning looked at her and said, ask. Chiu'er crossed her arms, looked at him with curious eyes, and asked, do you men like to seek the far away instead of the near? Chiu'er asked a very strange question. What does it mean to sacrifice the near for the far? Why should we sacrifice the near for the far? When there is clearly something close, we have to seek the far. Isn't this a disease? Tang Ning looked at her and said, not all men like to sacrifice the near for the distant. I don't do that, for example. Watching Tang Ning jump off the courtyard wall, Chiu'er stood in the courtyard, shook her head, and murmured, is it because Our Lady is not pretty enough, or are you stupid because of reading? When Tang Ning went there, she found that Zhao Yuan had come over. He was still Zhao Yuan's husband in name, so Zhao Yuan could leave the palace openly in the name of asking for advice. Of course, the real purpose was just to come here to eat and drink. Zhao Yuan stood beside him and kept talking. Tang Ning seemed to be listening to him, but in fact, her attention was focused on the pavilion not far away. In the pavilion, Tang Yaoyao was talking to Xiao Ru Xiaoi. Tang Yaoyao looked at Zhongyi and asked, "Do you really forgive him so easily?" He is, do you really not mind?" "Of course I mind," Zhongyi sighed softly and said, "but they also have the same deep affection for their husband." Tang Yaoyao glanced at her lips and said, "There are many people who like him. Can you let them all marry?" Zhongyi looked at her and asked doubtfully, "Who else likes my husband?" Tang Yaoyao waved his hand and said, "I'm just giving you an example. That is naturally impossible. Miss Li and the princess have experienced a lot with my husband. Others are different from them." Zhongyi looked at her and said, "This is the first time. From now on, Xiao and I will, if you can take good care of your husband, it won't be so easy next time." Tang Yaoyao bit her lower lip, picked up the teacup and took a sip. She only felt that the more she drank, the more thirsty she became. In the yard, Zhao Yuan looked at Tang Ning, took out a beautiful hairpin from her arms, and said, "I'll use this hairpin to coax Sister Wang to come here, and then I'll coax Sister Zhang and Sister Bai to come here tomorrow." Fang Xinyu jumped in from outside the door and asked, "Brother Tang Ning, where is the young lady?" Tang Ning said, "She's practicing in the back. You go find her." Fang Xinyu was followed by 3 younger girls. She looked over and said, "Look, let me just say that Zhao Yuan is here." She was about to find the hairpin in Zhao Yuan's hand when she said in surprise, "This hairpin is so beautiful. You are not a girl. What are you doing with the hairpin, pretending to be a girl?" "Who wants to pretend to be a girl?" Zhao Yuan shook his head quickly and said, "I plan to give it to you, give it to." Tang Ning looked at Zhao Yuan with interest. If nothing went wrong, the next moment would be the scene of this kid's overturn. He knew Prime Minister Wang's granddaughter, the one behind Fang Xinyu, and the 2 beside her should be the Zhang family sisters and Bai family sisters that Zhao Yuan mentioned. They didn't learn well at a young age and learned to flirt with girls. These 3 little girls were not as well behaved as Xiao Ru. They were all jealous. He wanted to see how Zhao Yuan dealt with them. Fang Xinyu looked at Zhao Yuan and asked, "Who do you want to give it to?" Zhao Yuan's eyes swept over the 3 little girls, and finally looked at Fang Xinyu, and said, "I'll give it to you, cousin. I think this hairpin is particularly suitable for you. You will definitely look beautiful wearing it." "Really?" Fang Xinyu was stunned, took the hairpin he handed over, and asked uncertainly, "Did you really give it to me?" Of course. Zhao Yuan nodded vigorously. "Thank you then. I'll bring you something delicious tomorrow." Fang Xinyu touched his head and went to the backyard to find Xiao Xiao. Zhao Yuan breathed a long sigh of relief, looked at the 3 little girls, and said, "You go and play with your cousin first. Now I want to ask my husband for advice." The 3 little girls went to the backyard. Zhao Yuan waited for their figures to disappear and immediately said, "Sir, if they come out to find me soon, just say that father has summoned me and I will go to the palace first." After saying that, he ran out quickly. Not long after Zhao Yuan ran out, Zhao Man walked in from outside the hospital. She glanced at Tang Ning first, but did not come over. Instead, she walked towards the pavilion. In the pavilion, Tang Yaoyao looked at Zhao Man walking over with a complicated expression. Zhongyi and Su Ru stood up, bowed slightly and said, "I have met the princess." "Oh, you don't have to be so polite." Zhao Man ran over quickly and said, "Sister Zhong, Sister Su, there are no outsiders here." Zhongyi nodded, looked at her, and said, "Let's go inside and talk. I just have something to say to my sister." Zhao Man looked at her, as if he had realized something. His face gradually turned red, he lowered his head and whispered, "Okay." Watching them walk in, Tang Ning suddenly remembered that he still had a bracelet to give to Zhao Man. Fang took the bracelet. When he walked out, Tang Yao Yao stood in the yard, looked at him and asked, "You are holding this bracelet, what to do?" Tang Ning explained, "Oh, this is a gift." Tang Ning looked at her and quickly removed the word Zhao. Fairy Tang has been angry with him for a long time. If she now said that this bracelet was given to Zhao Man, wouldn't it add fuel to the fire? The angry Fairy Tang was already terrifying, and Tang Ning was not sure if he could handle it even more angrily. At this moment, Zhao Yuan's fat face flashed through his mind. "This is for you." Tang Ning handed it to her and asked, "I think it matches you well. Do you like it?" Tang Yao Yao was startled and asked, "Why did you give me the bracelet for no reason?" "You don't want it." Tang Ning took her hand and said, "Don't forget it, you don't want me to give it to someone else." Before he finished speaking, his hand was empty, and in the blink of an eye, the bracelet had been put on Tang Yao Yao's wrist. "You can't take it as a gift." Tang Yao Yao glanced at him and left coldly. Tang Ning stood in the yard and sighed softly. It was originally Zhao Man's bracelet that she gave to Tang Yajing. She had to go to Tianashanjia to get another one in the next 2 days. She didn't know if her mother still had it. Separated by a wall, Tang Yao Yao was lying on the stone table in the yard, looking at the bracelet in his hand in a daze. Xiu'er came over, sat opposite her, and whispered, "Miss, I wish you had listened to me." Tang Yao Yao was too lazy to raise his eyes and asked, "What are you talking about?" Xiu'er said leisurely, "If you cooked the raw rice first, how could you still get the turn of the princess and that Li Bolan?" Tang Yao Yao straightened up suddenly, looked at her, and said in panic, "What are you talking about? Up to now you are still lying to yourself. If you continue like this, even if it is Zhao Yao Yao's turn, it will not be your turn. Li Yao Yao's turn will not be yours." Xiu'er shook her head, sighed softly, and said, "Miss, you have some fun. Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 426. What about Zhao Yao Yao and Li Yao Yao? Tang Yao Yao pulled Xiu'er's face and asked, "Is your butt itchy again?" Xiu'er sighed and said, "Miss, if you keep doing this, Yu Lao won't be able to help you." "You still said that." Tang Yao Yao slapped her on the butt twice and said, "Let's go, let me be alone." Xiu'er rubbed her butt, stood a little further away, and then said, "Zhao Yao Yao and Li Yao Yao are just metaphors. Maybe there is something about Su Yao Yao." Tang Yao Yao was sitting in the yard, her expression changing. Seeing Xiu'er about to walk into the room, she shouted, "Come back." She looked at Xiu'er opposite, gritted her teeth and asked, "What exactly do you want to say?" "Before that, please answer me a question." Xiu'er looked at her and asked, "Do you like him?" "I don't like it," Tang Yao Yao blurted out, then shook her head irritably and said, "I don't know." Xiu'er rolled her eyes at her and asked, "I didn't say who he was. Who were you thinking about just now?" "Miss, don't lie to yourself." Xiu'er looked at her and said, "If you don't like him, how can you not like Miss Li and Miss Su? After knowing that they are both with him, how can you not like him? You're angry, why can't you sleep at night? You're just jealous." Tang Yao Yao rolled up her sleeves. "Who are you talking about being jealous? Is it because your butt?" Xiu'er looked at her and said, "If you hit me again, I won't say anything." Tang Yao Yao put down her sleeves again, looked away, and said, "Keep talking." Xiu'er looked at her and said with some regret, "Miss, you had the best chance. You are so close to Sister Xiaoi, Sister Xiaoru, and so close to him, but you just ruined your good cards. Not to mention Miss Li, even the princess got ahead of you. Do you know why?" Tang Yao Yao was unsure, "Because I'm too fierce." Xiu'er shook her head and said, "Although miss, you are a bit fierce, but I think he likes you for being fierce. Some people in this world are like this." The more cruel you are to him, the more he will like it. If you don't do it someday, it's so fierce, he's not used to it yet. Why is that? Tang Yao Yao didn't hide it anymore. After thinking about it carefully, she asked, "What's wrong with me that I can't compare to that big wave?" After she finished speaking, she remembered something and looked down at her chest. "Oh, it's not because of this." She waved her hand and said, "Miss, although you are not as good as Miss Li, but compared with the princess, forget it, let's not talk about it. In short, this is not important." Tang Yao Yao was a little embarrassed and asked, "What's the reason?" "Because they didn't lie to themselves like you." She looked at her and said, "Didn't you say that the princess was going to marry to Chu State? You told him before leaving, so he went to Chu State in person. He brought her back, and when he came back from Chu, Miss Li did not lie to him, she boldly expressed her feelings, and then we had a 3-year agreement." She rolled her eyes at her and said, "But what about you? How can you win them if you even lied to yourself? Now that you have missed the best opportunity, it will be difficult to get it back." Tang Yao Yao held her chin, thoughtfully. She looked at her and said leisurely, "Master Tang, don't think he is so powerful in other places, he can win the top prize, and can do many great things, but when it comes to the personal relationship between his children, I'm just a little better than you, Miss. You two are a good match." Tang Yao Yao raised her head and asked, "What should we do?" She sighed and said, "Now is not the best time. Miss, you can only wait a little later, but don't worry, I will give you some advice." Tang Yao Yao seemed to be meeting her for the first time. He looked at her and asked, "Why do you understand so well?" She said, "I figured it out by myself after reading a book." Tang Yao Yao asked curiously, "What book are you reading?" "The Romance of the West Chamber, The Peony Pavilion, and The Legend of the White Snake." She looked at her and said, "These books are actually written clearly. It's a pity that Mr. Tang can only write, and when it is his turn, he will silly." Tang Yao Yao stopped asking Shiur and held her face with both hands. It was not until this moment that she clearly realized a certain emotion in her heart. But how could she like that guy, and when did she start liking him? When Xiao Ai and Xiru forgave him today, she felt a little disappointed, but also seemed a little happy and thankful. Her face turned red and white. At a certain moment, she seemed to realize something. She looked at Chiur and suddenly said, "Why do I feel that you are more anxious than me?" "Of course." Chiur blinked, looked at her, and said, "You are my young lady. If I don't worry about you, who will?" Zhao Man and Zhou Yi talked in the room for a long time before coming out. When they came out, their faces were even redder. She just looked at Tang Ning in the yard, lowered her head and walked away. Tang Ning looked at Zhou Yi who came out and asked, "What have you been saying for so long?" Zhou Yi shook his head and said mysteriously, "This is a secret. There are a lot of secrets between women." Fortunately, their first meeting was relatively harmonious in a sense, so Tang Ning stopped asking questions in detail. At this time, Zhou Yi looked at him and said, "The princess is a princess after all, and the husband must be careful in front of others. If someone is taking advantage of her, something big will happen." Tang Ning naturally knew this and nodded, "Don't worry. Anything that involves the royal family is a big deal. As long as he is still in the capital and as long as the emperor's surname is Zhao, he cannot get too close or too intimate with Zhao Man. This is not the Chu kingdom, and Zhao Man is not Lanlin." Emperor Chen. It was not the first time that Tang Ning experienced the ruthlessness of Emperor Chen, not his cheap father-in-law in Chu state. It seems that the tunnel at home needs to be dug as soon as possible. Tang Ning asked Lu Lao to arrange for some people to renovate the courtyard and secretly communicate with the princess mansion. Lu Lao arranged for 12 people. They were not many, but they were absolutely loyal. The guards of Princess Zhao Man's mansion were all from the palace. It was not ruled out that there were spies from Emperor Chen, so Zhao Man arranged for everyone to be there. Hospital. After making these arrangements, Tang Ning left home and went to Tianatianzhu. Su Mei was reading in the room. Tang Ning walked in and asked, Gong Sun Ying was taken away by the Ministry of Punishment. Your master didn't make things difficult for you, right? Su Mei closed the book, stood up, and said, Don't worry, she won't do anything to me. Naturally, without me, her years of hard work would have been in vain. Tang Ning did not doubt her words. The reason why Tianatianzhu was famous was not because of the couplets at the door or the delicious food here, but because Tianatianzhu had Su Mei, the proprietress of the first restaurant in the capital and the most beautiful woman in the capital. Su Mei looked at Tang Ning and said, Don't think that stealing another girl's heart is the end of it. She is a princess, so you should be more careful. Tang Ning nodded and said, I know. He and Su Mei sat in the room for a while, and then went to the backyard together. Thanks to Mei during your absence Tang Yu sat at the table, looked at Tang Ning, and said, she was afraid that I would be bored here, so she would go out with me every few days, and would often take me there. Look at Zairu and Zaiai. Mei has taken care of me for so long. She looked at Su Mei, suddenly stood up, took out something from the cabinet, handed it to Su Mei, and said, I have never given you anything, so I will give you this bracelet. You. Su Mei did not refuse. After taking it, she said with a smile, Thank you, mother. Tang Ning coughed lightly and asked, Mom, do you have any other bracelets there? Tang Yu looked at him and asked, What's wrong? Didn't I just give you one? Tang Ning said sheepishly, Something happened. Tang Yu looked at his expression and suddenly asked, Did you give it to someone else? Tang Ning nodded awkwardly. There's more. Tang Yu asked with a smile on her face, How many do you want? Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 427. How many? Tang Ning was stunned and said quickly, One is enough. Tang Yu took another bracelet and said, If it's not enough, just tell me, mother has more here. Enough, it was just an accident just now. Why would Tang Ning give bracelets to others? This kind of gift is of great significance. Generally speaking, it is a token of love from a man to a woman, or an heirloom from a mother-in-law to a daughter-in-law. He put away the bracelet and sat in the yard for a while. It was getting late. After coming out of the yard, he turned his head to look at Su Mei and asked, Aren't you going to sleep? Su Mei looked at him and asked, Do you think about sleeping every time you see me? Tang Ning shook his head and said, It's just a habit. You are not used to not sleeping. Su Mei looked at the bracelet on her hand again and said, I'm not sleepy now. He came to the front yard and found that the old woman was standing in the yard. After looking at him, she turned around and walked out. Tang Ning walked into the room, looked at Su Mei and asked, I offended your master last time, will she leak what happened here? Su Mei waved her hand and said, Don't worry, you just need to take care of the outside, I'm here, nothing will happen. Tang Ning trusted her 100%, and after hearing her words, he dispelled the last bit of doubt. Su Mei sat down beside the bed and said, Although there was not much shock in the court during your absence, there were some changes. Now that you are back, you have to understand it. She had a very accurate control of the court situation, and knew a lot of court secrets that even Tang Ning didn't know. The secret intelligence network was unknown. When Su Mei was talking, Tang Ning sat beside her and listened carefully. There is a big difference between the courts of Chen and Chu. Although Chu has become increasingly powerful in recent years, the structure of the court is not reasonable. A seriously ill emperor, an incompetent prince, and a strong regent. This structure is extremely unstable. The consequence is that after the death of the Chu emperor, the prince was abolished. During the process of Prince Xian ascending the throne, the entire Chu state experienced considerable turmoil. However, after the turmoil, with his reputation and ability, Chu is about to usher in a stable development period. Chen state has no problem of unstable court at all. The Emperor Chen is in his prime and has not appointed a prince. Although the contradictions between Prince Kong and Prince Duan are not small, they are kept within a controllable range by the Emperor Chen. Both of them have experienced ups and downs. After half a year of precipitation, they have become evenly matched again, and no one has obviously won over the other. On the contrary, Prince Hui, who has always had a low sense of presence, has appeared in the eyes of the public many times in the past 6 months. Perhaps Emperor Chen was disappointed with Prince Duan and Prince Kong, so he intentionally supported Prince Hui, who had no background, and entrusted him with several unimportant tasks. Prince Hui handled these tasks properly. Although there was no big highlight, there was no omission. However, compared with Prince Duan and Prince Kong, Prince Hui has never been competitive. Even if he has no good reputation, he has no negative comments. In recent days, through these things, he has gained some praise. The emperor's heart is unpredictable. No one knows whether Emperor Chen did it intentionally or wanted to suppress Prince Duan and Prince Kong, but this move still played a deterrent role, making Prince Duan and Prince Kong honest for a long time. After Su Mei finished speaking, she looked at him and said, "The court situation is changeable. Don't stand on the side before the situation is completely clear." Tang Ning nodded and said, "I understand. Emperor Chen is not dead yet, and there is no sign of death. At this time, those who stand on the side early are generally regarded as thorns in the eyes of the other forces and will not have a good end. The Tang family and some dignitaries are just because the labels on them are too obvious, there is nothing they can do. He can't stand on the side of Prince Duan, so he can only use Prince Kong to make use of each other." Su Mei was silent for a while before saying, "However, many people in the court now think that you have been recruited by Prince Kong. If you don't like Prince Duan, you can get closer to Prince Hui appropriately, and you can also shut some people up." Speaking of shutting up some people, Tang Ning missed the kiss with Lan Lan, and his thoughts flew to the grove outside Kangzhou City. Seeing that he didn't respond, Su Mei still had a lingering smile on her face. She tapped his forehead and asked, "What are you thinking about?" "Nothing." Tang Ning immediately retracted his thoughts, shook his head, and said, "I'm not familiar with King Hui. If I approach him without reason, he might think I have some intentions. Let's forget it." Su Mei looked at him and said, "Forget it, it's getting late. You should go back to accompany your wife. You're distracted here anyway." Tang Ning looked at the sky, stood up, and asked, "Do you really not need me to coax you to sleep first?" Su Mei waved her hand, let's go." Not long after Tang Ning left, the old woman came in from outside, looked at Su Mei, and asked, "There is actually someone in this world who has been with you for so long, and can still not have any evil thoughts?" Su Mei leaned against the head of the bed and said lazily, "Being born with a charming body is not invincible. You can't conquer everyone with just a face." The old woman said again, "If he doesn't want you, what else can he want from you?" Su Mei looked at her and asked, "Why can't I want him?" Tang Ning thought about Su Mei's suggestion to keep in touch with King Hui appropriately, and decided to forget it. He rarely makes friends with purpose. To be a friend, you must at least have a similar temperament and be comfortable with someone, such as Xiaoju. In fact, their temperaments are quite different, and their situations are also different. He already has 2 lovely wives, while Xiaoju is still an older single who can't find a girlfriend. Xiaoju originally came here today to go out for a drink with him, but Tang Ning felt that the weather was cold recently and it would be better to go out for a drink than at home, around the small stove, eating hot pot and drinking wine. If it was snowing, the atmosphere would be even better. In fact, Xiaoju and Tang Ning were the same, they didn't have many friends. Perhaps this was why the two of them were able to chat together. Lao Zheng had already gone to buy meat to prepare for the evening. Xiaoju sat across from Tang Ning and said, "Do you know why I can become friends with you?" Tang Ning said casually, "Why?" "Because we were the same before." Xiaoju looked at him and said, "Now we are the same again." The more people lack something, the more they like to show off. Xiaoju can now be called an upright man, and he never forgets to show off. Tang Ning looked at Xiao Ru Xiao I and Zhao Man who were chatting harmoniously not far away, looked at Xiaoju, shook her head and said, "We are different." Xiaoju looked back, with a shocked expression on his face. He looked at him and asked, "Although you are handsome, I am not bad either. You are the first on the list, and I am the second on the list. It's so different, I just can't figure out why. Why is no one in the capital willing to marry you?" Xiaoju nodded. As an older leftover man, Xiaoju is obviously eager to transform into a real man. Unfortunately, he can't announce this to the whole capital. The rumors that spread are too water to be recovered. What's more, this is not a rumor at all. He looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Why do so many women like you? Do you have any tricks? My young father-in-law is here too." There was a voice next to her. Tang Ning turned her head and saw Princess Anyang and Zhao Man walking over. After greeting each other, Princess Anyang looked at Xiaoju and said, "Tonight I am hosting a banquet at Tianrunju, and I have invited many ladies and daughters. Do you want to come with me?" Princess Anyang is very popular among the younger generation in the capital. Tang Ning thinks that a big reason is that she often holds such banquets, giving these young men and women enough opportunities to get to know each other. If one of them accidentally falls in love with each other, it is easy it can lead to a marriage. The relationship between Xiaoju and Princess Anyang has always been good. Obviously, as the biggest matchmaker in the capital, she is already paving the way for Xiaoju's lifelong events. Xiaoju looked at her, shook his head and said, "Thank you, Princess, for your kindness, but I won't go to the banquet tonight." Princess Anyang looked at him and said in surprise, "Are you busy tonight?" Xiaoju nodded, pointed at Tang Ning and said, "I want to drink with him tonight." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 428. Drink wine. Princess Anyang looked at Xiaoju, shook her head helplessly, then looked at Zhao Man and said, "Let's go." Zhao Man glanced at Tang Ning, blinked at him, and looked away as if nothing had happened, before leaving with Princess Anyang. Girls change when they turn 18. When a girl is about to turn 18, she also changes a lot. When Tang Ning met Zhao Man a year ago, she was still an unruly and unreasonable monster. A year later, she had turned into a little goblin who knew how to tease people all the time. Old Zheng had already bought it. Tang Ning stood up, clapped her hands and said, "I'll get the wine." Princess Anyang, who returned to the pavilion, sighed and said, "I originally thought that Xiaoju was not too young now, so I wanted him to get to know more wealthy people, but his mind just didn't work." Zhao Man said, "Sister Anyang, you are not young anymore, don't you have a clear head?" Princess Anyang looked at her and said in a daze, "You're even teasing me." "No," Zhao Man said quickly, "I just think that Sister Anyang should find a reliable person to marry. It would be nice to have a shoulder to lean on." Princess Anyang glanced at her and said, "I'm not as lucky as you." Zhao Man was secretly happy, thinking of Zhongyi's instructions, and said with a straight face, "Sister Anyang, what are you talking about? I don't understand." Inside the room, Tang Ning looked at Xiaoju who was sitting by the fire and asked, Why don't you go to Princess Anyang's banquet? Xiaoju curled his lips and said, is it because the hot pot is not delicious or your wine is not delicious? Why should I go to that boring banquet? Tang Ning looked at him and didn't know what to say for a moment. Let's not talk about this anymore. Xiaoju waved his hand, looked at Tang Ning and said, let's talk about how I can meet more women. I don't think I'm any worse than you. Why do all the women in the capital want to marry you? Tang Ning looked at him and asked, do you know why you are still alone now? Xiaoju looked puzzled, why? Forget it, let's not talk about it. Looking at Xiaoju's eager look, Tang Ning sighed and said, if you want a woman to marry you, there is only one way. Xiaoju hurriedly said, what can I do? Tang Ning said, you go to the most famous brothel in the capital and order 10 women at a time. From the next day, there will be matchmakers willing to propose marriage for you. Xiaoju waved his hand and said, it's okay to drink in a place like a brothel, but it's really not okay to come here. Is there any other way? Xiaoju relied on his own skills, so nothing worked. Tang Ning waved her hand and said, is it because the hot pot is not delicious or the wine is not good to drink? What are you talking about? Old Zheng had already brought the cut sheep over. His knife skills were at the peak of his skills. The pieces of sheep were evenly thin and thick. You could blanch them in the pot and eat them. Tang Ning waved to her and said, Old Zheng, sit down and eat together. It was boring for 2 people to eat, but it was a little more interesting for 3 people to drink. Zhao Yuan came in from the door smelling the smell, bought himself a pair of chopsticks, and moved a bench. His luck with love has been running rampant recently, and it has become a disaster for him. Under the entanglement of 3 little girls, he comes here to take refuge every day. Xiaoju took a pill and took a sip of wine before looking at Tang Ning and asked, I heard you are going to the Ministry of War. Tang Ning nodded and said, I'll go in a few days. Xiaoju said, at the end of the year, the 16th Guards competition, the Ministry of War is very busy. It's really not the right time for you to go. Tang Ning rinsed a piece of sheep and said casually, what kind of competition? Xiaoju explained, the 16 Guards have a small competition every year, and a big competition every 4 years. Each big competition requires ranking, which represents the combat strength of each guard. This year happens to be the year of the big competition. The big competition it is coordinated by the Ministry of War, so the Ministry of War will not be idle until the end of the year. The military system of the army followed the Tang system, with great improvements in details. The army stationed near the capital was subdivided into 16 guards, 4 of which were inside the capital, 2 were responsible for patrolling the city, and 2 were responsible for the palace. The guards, Xiaoju's right feather guard, and Lu Teng's left feather guard, are the closest personal troops of the emperor. The remaining 12 belong to various parts of the capital, and their main responsibility is to protect the safety of the capital. The army is different from other armies. They take defending the capital and the royal family as their own duty. Apart from regular drills, they will not leave the capital easily and have no battles to participate in. The annual competition ranking is to urge them to train strictly in daily life. If we are at the bottom of the big competition, we will be unable to hold our head high for the next 4 years. While drinking, Xiaoju said unconvinced, Lu Tang, didn't he just go to the Chu kingdom with you, and when he came back he was promoted to Lieutenant Zhou? If it was me who went there, why would it be his turn to take advantage of this? Lu Tang performed well as a guard during this trip, and was promoted to Captain Zhou by Emperor Chen. His rank was the same as Xiaoju's. In Xiaoju's view, this was a promotion at the same time, which was a huge advantage. However, if Xiaoju was really asked to be responsible for guarding, Tang Ning himself felt uneasy. What he should do most was to marry a wife and have children as soon as possible and pass on the legacy of their Xiao family. As a friend, Tang Ning felt that he had the obligation to remind Xiaoju, otherwise based on his ideological consciousness, the Xiao family's popularity would be cut off in his generation. He took a few mouthfuls of food, looked at Xiaoju and said, "You'd better finish your meal quickly and go to Tianashanju with Princess Anyang for a banquet." "I won't go." Xiaoju waved his hand and said, "I'm tired of Tianashanju's food. I think this shabu is not bad, and the wine there is not as good as yours." Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "The banquet is not for you to eat, but for you to get to know a few of our daughters. Maybe one of the girls will fall in love with you because of the lard. Do you really think the princess wants you to attend, for dinner?" "You mean, the princess wants to be a matchmaker for me?" Xiaoju glanced at his mouth and said, "Come on, she has held so many banquets, but she has never gotten married by herself. She is a few older than me. As for you, if it's really useful, why doesn't she look for it herself?" Tang Ning looked at him with pitiful eyes. Xiaoju looked up and asked, "Why, is there something on my face?" Tang Ning waved her hand, "There is nothing on your face, but there is someone behind you." Princess Anyang, who was anxious about Xiaoju's final event and was about to come to persuade him again, turned pale, pulled his ears and walked out the door. Xiaoju covered her ears and did not dare to resist. She hurriedly said, it hurts, let go." Princess Anyang tugged on his ears and said angrily, the princess, can go out whether or not to marry. I don't have to worry about young Master Xiao. If it wasn't for your wishes, I wouldn't bother to look for you. You have to go today. No, you have to go, before I marry you off. You have to come every time I hold a banquet." Xiao Zhuoren had already walked outside the door and said in a pitiful voice, "Wait a minute, I still have 2 pieces to eat." While Zhao Yuan was rinsing the sheep, he looked out the door with pity and said with emotion, "Sister Anyang is actually very fierce as the princess and aunt." He shook his head and said, "Don't marry a fierce wife. Uncle Fu Wang and brother Huai Wang married a fierce princess, so they can only marry one princess." At such a young age, Wolf Zi's ambition was obvious. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "How many do you want to marry when you grow up?" "Not many." Zhao Yuan looked at Tang Ning, feeling very envious that there were always so many beautiful ladies around him, and said, "It's about the same as my husband and my father. The so-called upper beam is not straight and the lower beam is crooked, because there is an emperor father of the 3 palaces and 6th courtyard." Zhao Yuan has already had this kind of unorthodox idea at a young age. In the 10 days since he returned from Chu, Tang Ning didn't leave the house much. Although the imperial edict to transfer him to the Ministry of War had been issued, the Minister of War, Lu Ding, had already said that he should report to the Ministry of War by November at the latest. As usual, he still planned to wait until the end of October to go. Before that, we have to go to the etiquette department to complete the handover procedures. After returning from Chu State, this was the first time he went to the Ministry of Rites, and he happened to meet the doctor of the temple department at the entrance of the rites department. "Good morning, Mr. Lu." Tang Ning waved and said hello. For Lu Jin, the doctor of the Ministry of Rites, this is also the first time he has come to the Ministry of Rites since the mission sent by the Ministry of Rites returned from Chu. Before today, he and the doctor of the Ministry of Rites took a long leave. Recently, he was at home and heard that Tang Ning was back. "I didn't come to the rights department, so I plan to go back to the Yamen today." Hearing the familiar voice, Lu Jin shivered and looked back at Tang Ning, who was walking towards him. He looked dazed, raised his head stiffly, and said in a trembling voice, "Tang, Lord Tang, morning. Chapter content is being worked on recovering, please visit again later. Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 429. Lu Jin stood in front of the office of the Ministry of Rites, not knowing whether to advance or retreat. The theory that Tang Ning was the broomstick who defeated the Minister of Hubu and sent the Minister of Punishment to Tianlao has long been spread throughout the capital. However, this is actually a bit exaggerated. Both the Minister of Hube and the Minister of Punishment were found to have problems themselves. You deserve to die, you deserve to be caught, you have to take the blame on yourself, you can't blame others. But the Ministry of Rights is different. As soon as Tang Ning entered the Ministry of Etiquette, a fraud case was discovered among the doctors of the Ministry of Rights, and the host and guest doctor suddenly fell seriously ill. If Lu Jin still didn't know that he had tampered with it just to get the position of the wedding messenger, he might as well resign and return home. Township, so as not to be swallowed up in the officialdom. The Ministry of Rights is the territory of the Tang family. Tang Ning and Tang Shangshu have a sworn hatred. He can't defeat Tang Shangshu, so he has to vent his anger on them. I'm afraid this is the truth. The legend that Lu Jin is not afraid of the broom star, what he was afraid of was Tang Ning's methods. Countless examples prove that those who are targeted by him will not end well. He was walking around the temple. All the doctors from the 3 departments had taken a long leave like him, and now he was the only one here. If Tang Ning wanted to continue to stir up trouble in the etiquette department and retaliate, wouldn't he be the first to bear the brunt? He looked anxious, and after thinking for a long time, he strode out of the ancestral department and headed towards the yamen where Lu Feng, the Minister of Rights, was located. When walking up the steps in front of the corridor, he felt that a certain blue brick on the step was a little loose. Lu Jin thought for a while, put a little force on his feet, and moved the green brick outward a little further. He had just arrived at the Ministry of Etiquette, and he had to ask for leave again. The Minister of Servants might not approve it, so he had to make adequate preparations first. If he sprained his foot when going down the steps, he would have to lie at home to recuperate. The Minister of Servants would not be unkind. He knocked on the door and walked into the government office. Lu Feng, the doctor of the Ministry of Etiquette, looked at him and asked, "Mr. Lu, has he recovered from his illness? You came back just in time. Several of you have been on leave these days, and the affairs of the Ministry of Rights are piling up. If you don't when you come back, I will visit you at home." Lu Jin stepped in and said awkwardly, "Your Excellency, sir, I am here to ask for another month's leave." "What?" Lu Feng looked at him and frowned, "What's going on with you guys? You just asked for leave for such a long time, and now you have to ask for it again. I think you are in good spirits. You don't look like you at all, you look seriously ill. If you can't tell me a reason today, I won't agree to it." "The Lord Assistant is considered one of his own." Lu Jin said with a grimace, "Your Excellency, you should also know that Tang Ning has returned to the Ministry of Rights. I am really worried about staying here. I don't know when he will be killed. So I want to go home first to avoid the limelight, and then come back after he leaves the Ministry of Rights." "Absurd." Lu Feng stood up and asked, "Do you also believe that broom star's theory?" Lu Jin said, "Don't be afraid of 10,000, just be afraid of what happens." Lu Feng walked out of the office and said, "Don't worry, he won't come to the rights department again after today." Lu Jin was startled and asked, "Is he leaving?" Lu Feng nodded and said, "Although he has not been in the Ministry of Rights Yamen for a long time, he is on this mission as a doctor in the Ministry of Rights. He has been away for half a year. There is no need to stay in the Ministry of Rights any longer. He came today to pack his things." "Of. That's good." Lu Jin breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Then I won't ask for leave." "Do you believe such a ridiculous thing?" Lu Feng walked out of the government office, glanced at him, and said, "Outsiders also rumored that he specializes in controlling the minister. He has been in the Ministry of Rights for so long, how come I don't have anything to do?" Lu Jin quickly complimented, "Your Excellency, the minister, is blessed by the gods. How can a mere bumbling star be your opponent?" Lu Feng waved his hand and said, "You should go back and do your work. I have some matters to do with Mr. Shangshu." He walked down the steps and stepped on a green brick on the steps. A small half of the blue brick was hanging outside, and when he stepped on it, it tilted up. Lu Feng only felt that his feet were empty, and then he staggered, his body became unstable, and he fell forward. There was a small flower garden under the corridor, which was surrounded by bricks and stones. Lu Feng fell down from the corridor and hit his head on the edge of the flower garden, and he started bleeding profusely in an instant. Tang Ning walked out of the guest office, holding in her arms the novel he had put in the Yamen room to pass the time when he was in the Ministry of Etiquette. She was about to come over and say something to Lu Shilang and leave. When she saw Lu Feng fell through the air, he lay on the ground holding his arms. His head was groaning, and he was still frozen in place. Lu Jin ran out of the government office and looked at the scene in front of him. After being stunned for a moment, he immediately said loudly, "Shilang Lu is injured. Someone, come quickly." The doctor who came after hearing the news finally helped Lu Feng stop the bleeding. Lu Jin looked at him and asked, "How is the injury of the master?" The doctor looked at him and said, "There is no fear of life, but the minister accidentally bumped into the corner of a blue brick. Even if he is cured, I am afraid he will leave scars in the future." Thinking of the blue brick, Lu Jin felt weak and said, "It's fine if there's no big deal, it's fine if there's no big deal." Lu Jin came out of the room and saw many people standing in the courtyard, looking around and talking in low voices. That man is really the nemesis of the assistant minister. Fortunately, Mr. Lu is very lucky. If he had moved an inch further to the side and hit the sharp corner of the green brick, he would probably be dead by now. How can he be the broom star? He is clearly the king of hell. It's so scary, it's impossible to guard against it. Cough, Lu Jin coughed, and everyone immediately stopped talking. With a calm expression, Lu Jin pointed to the step where the Minister of Rights fell, and said, "Have people repair it so that no one will fall down again. In addition, throw the brick that injured Minister Lu farther away." After bidding farewell to the Ministry of Rights, Tang Ning could stay at home for a few more days before reporting to the Ministry of War. Both the home and the Princess Mansion were under construction, and Zhao Man announced that he would build a garden in the backyard. In this way, even if there was a big noise behind him, no one would suspect it. Princess Anyang took them out for a walk today, and even Tang Yao Yao came to join in the fun. It seemed that the bracelet he gave by accident really worked. Since then, she has never mentioned Li Tianlan and Li Tianlan again. Zhao Man's matter. Twice Tang Ning went to see her and found that she was actually reading the West Chamber and the Peony Pavilion again, and actually taking notes while reading. Tang Ning originally wanted to see what she was taking notes, but she ruthlessly kicked her out. He had nothing to do at home alone, so he sat next to Xiao Xiao and watched her read. In addition to practicing martial arts, Xiao Xiao would spend at least an hour reading every day. Unlike the playful Fang Xinyu, she had a very calm temperament, was serious about her work, and could persevere for a long time. However, in Tang Ning's view, reading books was necessary, but when it's time to play, she can't be vague. She didn't have a happy childhood, and now she can make up for it as much as she can. She and Fang Xinyu complement each other perfectly. Tang Ning and Xiao Xiao were sitting in the pavilion, and Lao Zheng was sitting in the yard, teaching Nanan how to read, occasionally looking over here. After an unknown amount of time, the old beggar came out of the corner, looked at old Zheng, and asked, "Pig killer, why do you always look at my apprentice?" Lao Zheng turned around, looked at him and asked, "Is there any?" The old beggar said, "Don't try to deny it, I have been staring at you for a long time." Lao Zheng looked over again and said, "The little girl has amazing bones and is very talented. It is really rare to see a good young talent practicing martial arts. You really want to steal my precious apprentice?" The old beggar narrowed his eyes and threatened, "I'm warning you, Xiao Xiao is my apprentice. If you want to pass on your pig-killing skills, you can find an apprentice yourself. Young master, you want to take advantage of my precious apprentice, otherwise, don't blame me for being rude." Lao Zheng shook his head and said, "You misunderstood, I didn't want to accept the little girl as my apprentice. Hearing this, the old beggar frowned even more and said, "What do you mean by this? My apprentice is so talented that you only meet her once in 100 years, but you don't want to accept her as your apprentice." Lao Zheng was silent for a moment, looked at him, and asked, "Are you sick? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 430. Ruyi Xiaolang Jun Text Volume 428. Beasts are worse than beasts. Having known the old beggar for so long, Tang Ning already understood why he was so unwelcome in Lingzhou before and was beaten every now and then. Selling incomplete martial arts secrets, peddling pornographic books, tricking children into giving lollipops, and consecrating fallen women. This kind of slut can make even the calm old Zheng angry. If he hadn't been defeated, he would have been chopped into 8 pieces long ago. What old and unrefined and old and disrespectful are talking about this kind of person? It's okay that he doesn't look like a top master, but he's not even as good as a normal person. He's getting more and more unrefined as he grows older. Only in front of Xiao Xiao will he deliberately pretend to be a kind teacher. Old Zheng probably doesn't want to see the old beggar, or he may be worried that one day he will lose control and chop him and bring humiliation upon himself, so he took the initiative to take on the responsibility of guarding Tang Ning. November is coming soon, and Tang Ning deliberately reported to the Ministry of War 2 days in advance. The Ministry of War is equivalent to the Ministry of National Defense in later generations. It is in charge of the selection and promotion of military officers, military registration, weapons, military orders, etc. It does not involve military power itself. Even the Minister of War Lu Ding is a 100% civilian. Even so, the position of Minister of War is not something that any civilian can hold. The Lu family is a family of military generals. Military generals must not only be brave, but also have strategies. None of the generals with deep roots in the capital are reckless men who only know how to charge into battle. When Lu Ding was young, he was already a famous general of the state of Chen. He served as the general of the 16 guards and now serves as the Minister of War. Lu Tang can sit in the position of Zhou Duwei at a young age. His future is limitless. Among all the generals in the capital, the Lu family is also outstanding. The Xiao family was once glorious, but now only Xiao Ju is left, and it can no longer be compared with the Lu family. He walked into the Ministry of War and explained his purpose. The guard at the door hurriedly ran in to report. Although the Ministry of War is also a civil service office, many officials in the Ministry of War, including the Minister of War, are military officers, and the layout of the Ministry of War is different from other offices. When you walk into the front yard, you can see stone locks, stone shoulders, stone mills and other things placed in a corner of the yard. Tang Ning glanced at it and heard footsteps. The owner accompanied a man out of a yamen. The man who came out bowed to him and said, "Sir Tang, I have been waiting for you for a long time." The man was about 30 years old, with a steady voice and powerful steps. He had a unique and sharp aura, which was completely different from the officials of the Ministry of Revenue, Ministry of Rights and Ministry of Justice. Tang Ning clasped his fists in return and asked, "May I know who this gentleman is?" The guard stepped forward and introduced, "This is Minister Nai." The person who greeted him was Nai Qian, the left minister of the Ministry of War. Before Tang Ning left Beijing for the state of Chu, Emperor Chen had promoted him to the position of Langzhong of the Ministry of Rights, which was a 5th-rank official position. Now that he had left the Ministry of Rights and was working in the Ministry of War, his official rank would not be lower than the 5th rank in principle. Minister Nai welcomed him into a certain duty room and said, "The minister has been summoned to the palace by His Majesty, but the Lord has already informed you a few days ago that if Lord Tang comes, You will be temporarily appointed as the Langzhong of the Ministry of War. There were originally 2 Langzhongs in the Ministry of War. Lang Zhong, who was ordered to leave Beijing a month ago to patrol the military camps of various states. This is Lang Zhongwu. He pointed to a person in the duty room and introduced him to Tang Ning. Lang Zhongwu did not have the temperament of someone who came out of the military camp. He was obviously a civil servant. He bowed to Tang Ning, but his eyes were alert, and he said, "I have long heard of Mr. Tang's great name." This Wu doctor seemed a little afraid of him when they first met, and Tang Ning did not show too much enthusiasm, but just bowed his hands in return. After arranging everything for him, Minister Nai looked at him and said, "I have some things to do there, so I will leave first. If you have anything, come to me at any time." Tang Ning heard from Xiaoju that the Ministry of War seemed to be busy with the 16 guards competition held every 4 years recently, and it was not very idle. He nodded and said, "Minister Nai, go and get busy." Nai Qian walked out of the Ministry of War and saw a man standing in the yard, staring at the stone lock in the corner. From the beginning, he noticed this person. The other person had a very familiar temperament. Although he was just standing there casually at the moment, he gave people the feeling of a sharp knife. This kind of temperament, he had only seen in the army. What surprised him even more was that the invisible pressure from the person opposite him was even greater than that of the general of the 16 guards. Nai Qian hesitated for a moment and asked, "I wonder which general this brother served under before." He was sure that this man must have come from the military. With such a fierce momentum, he was most likely from a battle-hardened army. Old Zheng looked back at him and shook his head, saying, "You must have recognized the wrong person. I am just a butcher." Nai Qian's eyes stayed on him for a long time before he shook his head, thinking that this might be his illusion. He raised his foot and was about to step down the stairs, but his footsteps suddenly stopped, lowered his head and looked at the ground, slowly fell down, and walked down the stairs gently. The first day in the Ministry of War was particularly leisurely. There was nothing for him to do. Tang Ning went there at noon and was dismissed after sitting for less than an hour. After the gong sounded, Tang Ning walked out of the Ministry of War and found that he was the only one out. He stood at the door and waited for a while. When old Zheng came back from buying meat, no one in the Ministry of War was dismissed. Among the 4 government offices he had worked in, the Ministry of War had the most serious overtime. It was hard to believe that Minister Liu was usually kind and affable. He was not polite at all to his subordinates and did not dare to come out of the duty room for a quarter of an hour after the office was dismissed. Old Zheng bought a pound of pork belly and planned to chop it into stuffing for dumplings at night. Tang Ning had just returned home when she saw Princess Anyang coming in from outside. "Is the princess here to look for the princess?" Tang Ning looked at her and said, "The princess and Xiaoi are out. They may not be back for a while. Zhao Man and Xiru and Xiaoi have become real sisters now, and they are very close. Even if she often comes here, no one will gossip about her." "No, I'm here to look for Xiaoju." Princess Anyang looked around and said, "Isn't he here?" Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I just came back from the government office and didn't see him." Princess Anyang ran into the room in disbelief and looked around. After finding nothing, she left unwillingly. Tang Ning stood up and said, "Come out, she's gone." Xiaoju climbed out of the tank in the corner, took a long breath, and said a little depressed, "Finally gone." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Do you owe her money?" Xiaoju shook his head and said, "She wants to introduce a girl to me." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Isn't that good? Don't you always want to get married and start a family?" "You don't know." Xiaoju waved his hand and said, "She introduced Lu Teng's sister." Tang Ning thought for a while and asked, "Lu Teng's sister, is she ugly?" From the looks of Lu Teng and Lu Shangju, it can be seen that the Lu family's genes are not bad, and there is no reason for Lu Teng's sister to be ugly. Xiaoju said, "It's okay, she's pretty." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Then you don't want to?" From his reaction just now, those who didn't know would think that Princess Anyang wanted to introduce Lu Teng to him. "You can think so." Tang Ning looked at him and said, "Don't you dislike Lu Teng? If you marry his sister, you will be his brother-in-law and you will be able to suppress him from now on." "Forget it." Xiao Ju shook his head and said, "In order to take advantage of his brother-in-law and sacrifice my happiness for the rest of my life, I am not that stupid. I, Xiao Ju, will never marry Lu Ya even if I die." Tang Ning thought for a moment and said, "I think you and Princess Anyang are a good match. Why don't you consider her?" "Her?" Xiao Ju waved his hand without hesitation and said, "I always treat her as my sister." "Will you marry your sister? You are not related by blood." "That won't work either." Xiao Ju shook his head and said, "I treat her as my sister. If I marry her, I will become a beast. No, I will be worse than a beast." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 431. Chapter 429, The Battle of the Ministry of War. Chapter 429 of the main text of Mr. Ruyi, is not sweet. You can't force emotional matters, so Tang Ning stopped trying to persuade Xiao Ju. He looked at Xiao Ju and changed the subject. "Why did Lu Teng's sister beat you?" "When I was a kid, I had a fight with Lu Teng. Lu Ya stood up for his brother and beat me every time he saw me." Speaking of this incident, Xiao Ju said with resentment and regret on his face, "It's a pity that my sister died early, otherwise that crazy woman wouldn't dare to be so presumptuous. There is no love without reason in the world, and there is no hatred without reason. Xiao Ju can't stand Lu Teng and opposes him everywhere. It turns out that there is a historical reason. And his sister is the former queen. If she were still alive, Xiao Ju could indeed walk sideways in the capital. Lu Teng's sister beats you every time she sees you." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "You can't even beat a woman?" He, I'm a man, can a man beat a woman?" Xiao Ju smiled disdainfully and looked at Tang Ning and said, "You think I'm you? It's not that I can't fight back, but I can't beat him at all." Tang Ning looked behind him and waved, "Princess." Xiao Ju shuddered and jumped up from where he was. Seeing that there was no one behind him, he was about to speak angrily when he heard footsteps outside the door. He took 2 steps at a time and hid back in the tank. Princess Anyang strode in and looked at Tang Ning and said, "I asked the gatekeeper of the Tang mansion, and they said Xiao Ju was here." Tang Ning glanced at the corner of the wall and shook his head, saying, "I just came back from the government office, maybe he came earlier." Princess Anyang looked at him, then looked at the corner of the wall, and walked over. "Ah, it hurts." After a while, Xiao Ju was dragged out of the tub by her ears. He finally broke free, rubbed his ears, and said angrily, "Men and women should not be intimate. Can you not touch me every time?" Princess Anyang looked at him and said, "I finally asked Lu Ya to come out. Come with me quickly and don't let her wait anxiously." "If you want to go, go," Xiao Ju said with a firm face. "Anyway, I won't go. That woman will never get married in her life." Princess Anyang looked at him and said, "Didn't she beat you when she was a child? That's all in the past. You two are not young anymore. She has agreed to see you. You are a grown man, why are you still shy?" "I won't go." Xiao Ju's attitude was extremely firm. "I told her that you asked her out." Princess Anyang looked at him and said, "If you don't go, she might think you lied to her and chase you to the palace tomorrow to settle the score." Xiao Ju thought about his 100 men, and imagined how he was beaten up by that woman in public. He patted the dust off his clothes and said, "Go back, but let me make it clear in advance that I'm going this time to give you face. A man will often be beaten by a woman, either because he can't beat her, or because he likes her, or because he can't beat her and likes her. There is no such thing as gentlemanly manners, an excuse for not beating a woman. This is just a fig leaf that Xiao Ju gives himself." Tang Yao Yao popped his head out from the wall and asked, "It's been a long time since we last sparred. Do you want to have a fight? I'll give you one hand." "Do I need you to give me one hand?" Tang Ning stood up and said disdainfully, "Giving up one hand is not a big deal. If you have the ability, give up two. As the saying goes, a monk rings the bell for a day." Since Tang Ning has already arrived at the Ministry of War, he feels uncomfortable watching others busy to death while he has nothing to do. He looked at the busy Dr. Wu and took the initiative to walk over and asked, "Dr. Wu, do you need any help here?" Dr. Wu raised his head and shook his head quickly, saying, "No, no, since the Shangshu didn't ask you to do anything, why don't you read a book or walk around the government office?" Tang Ning looked at him. Dr. Wu seemed to be really afraid of him. He was defensive when he spoke. After he nodded slightly, he didn't say much to him. He simply walked out of the duty room and strolled around. The Ministry of War was not big. It was not even half the size of Tang Mansion. Tang Ning walked around and returned to the Ministry of War. As soon as he stepped into the yard, he heard a quarrel coming from the front. "Several officers, this is the way of competition every year. You have already drawn lots. What are you dissatisfied with?" This weak voice with a little lack of confidence was the voice of Dr. Wu. At this time, in the courtyard of the Ministry of War, Dr. Wu was sandwiched between 16 big men. His face was pale and trembling. A man in armor frowned and said, "Left and right Yulin guards were drawn to the first game." "What's this?" As soon as he finished speaking, someone intervened and said, "Our Yulin guards are the strongest among the 16 guards. We have to fight together in the first game. Isn't it an advantage for those trash?" This person's temper was obviously more irritable. His voice was like a bell. Tang Ning could hear it clearly even when he was standing at the door. However, his words seemed to have poked a hornet's nest, and the crowd immediately exploded. "The damn Yulin guard is the strongest, have you asked us Yinkai guard? Our Jinya guard hasn't said anything yet, why are you Yinkai guard butting in? What else can you Jinya guard do besides patrolling the city? You have the nerve to act like a big shot here. The Yulin guard is so great, how about we compete now?" Tang Ning finally understood why the 16 guards had a small competition every year and a big competition every 4 years. It was simply to prevent them from being too idle. In addition to their duties of guarding the capital, the 16th Guards of the Forbidden Army do not have the power to control the armies of various states. What they have to do is to protect the capital and prevent any rebels from attacking here. But Chen State has been at peace for many years. Apart from unstable borders, there are no rebel forces within the territory. Even if there were, they were quickly suppressed by the local government. In this way, the 16th Guards seemed very idle. If they didn't find something to do, they would probably lose even the last bit of their sense of existence. But if they were allowed to compete, there would be many objections among the 16 Guards, mainly regarding the competition system. Whether it is a small competition every year or a big competition every 4 years, they are all knockout matches, determined by drawing lots, and one group is eliminated in each game. In this way, it only takes 15 games to determine the final winner, with a maximum of 2 games added. The second and third places are also ranked. A problem arises. The left and right Habayashi guards are the Emperor's guards. They are the strongest among the 16 guards and are equally matched. If the two teams faced each other in the first game, they would definitely eliminate one team and compete for the third place. They are not qualified to compete for third place. Strong teams don't want to encounter them at the beginning. These people are often in the army and have hot tempers, so there is the current quarrel. Seeing that the quarrels among the people were getting louder and louder, and several people had already started to take action, Wu Langzhong hurriedly advised, "Commanders, if there is anything we can discuss, don't be impulsive, don't be impulsive." Boom. Among the random punches, someone accidentally punched Wu Langzhong in the face. Wu Langzhong immediately said ouch and fell to the ground with a nosebleed. Other officials of the Ministry of War stood in the distance, watching this scene with a look of humiliation on their faces. Although the Ministry of War also has the word soldier, most of them are civilian officials. Every time they deal with these ruffians, they always suffer some small losses. I have been holding grudges in my heart for a long time. The people of the 16th Guards did not care about Wu Langzhong who fell on the ground, but instead the quarrel became more intense. Everyone stop it! When the atmosphere in the courtyard was about to reach its peak, a voice came from the direction of the door.